Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me as always is my co-host, the Marvel, Mark Tipton.
Oh, the Marvel. Very nice. I do appreciate the introductions each week, and the Marvel's very nice. I have long times been a fan of Marvel, because when you say Marvel, that implies comics to me, which, like many folks, I was a fan of for some time. And on this week's edition of the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast, I would like to talk about something that we have talked about in primarily a negative light. We have talked a lot about cinematic matches and the cinematic aspect that has, kind of invaded professional wrestling. And when you say that to me, I usually have a negative reaction as a member of the audience. Because I think of, let's say, sound effects of a freight train during the course of a match, that kind of thing, that jumps out to me. A sound effect like that is a negative, but we want to try to come at it from a somewhat different point of view on this week's edition. We want to try to say, hey, what are some aspects of the movies or cinema that do in some ways translate and, kind of benefit professional wrestling?
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said it before on the podcast, wrestling has been so busy trying to be other things for the last 20 years or so, rather than just being great professional wrestling, that a lot of stuff has got convoluted and misunderstood. Wrestling is like music. Wrestling is like comic books. Wrestling is like movies. It's like a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it's still professional wrestling, and it needs to live, die, and breathe within the confines of that reality-based, sports-based world. With movies in general, there's a lot of great things we can pull from the movies, but once again, it has to be able to be translated to professional wrestling. And we're going to go over some instances of that and the hows and whys of why it does or does not work.
All right. Well, like I say, I do think you're coming at this from a perspective I had not considered. As a viewer, I get caught up in the very obvious things. We see the types of matches the Hardys had and those sorts of things, and the lake of, I can't remember, bring you back to life. I can't remember that anyway. Reincarnation, Lake of Reincarnation, I believe, and of course, Smoking Joe Frazier, the Kangaroo, those sorts of things. But I take it you're talking about as far as because professional wrestling is entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so what you're trying to say is you're trying to, in much the same way that movies try to involve their audience in the story that's being told, I take it you're saying professional wrestling can, and when done well, does bring the audience in a similar fashion.
Yeah, like I've said before, for me personally, professional wrestling is the most beautiful form of storytelling there is. That's for me because I'm a professional wrestling fan. Do I like movies? Of course I love movies. But to me, professional wrestling is hands down the best because I've never had the visceral reactions that I've had to professional wrestling. I've never had those for any other, to an extent, but not to the extent of what I've had for professional wrestling, whether it be love, hate, indifference, whatever it may be. I've always had a very strong reaction to professional wrestling. So when done correctly, yes, professional wrestling is meant to draw you in and meant to have you engaged in we said it before, wrestling is the ultimate fan participation thing. If you go to a movie theater, it's not really of decorum to cheer or boo and stuff like that. But at wrestling, that's the norm. That's what we want, right? So yeah, like I said, there's lots of elements in movies that do translate, but there's a lot that don't as well. Like you said about the Braun Strowman freight train thing, that doesn't translate. I'm sure that was that's one of those WWE television writer things like, oh yeah, that'd be hilarious. doesn't matter if it's hilarious, it's phony, right? And it's fake, and it reminds people that you're phony and you're fake. So why remind the audience of something like that?
Well, I will try not to dwell on this example that I brought up too long, but when I hear it, it makes me think that it's almost a marketing thing. They have, when Braun comes out, you see the Strowman Express, and so, and so it's part of the kind of the brand they've created for him. So you include that in and say, hey, maybe it'll help sell an extra T-shirt or two or something like that. But one of the things that comes through to me is you were talking about how, that kind of takes away from the reality-based aspect. Sometimes I wonder, do those who are involved in the creative portion, particularly of the WWE, and, well, we could be pointed at others as well, do they view it as reality-based?
No, I don't think they do, and I think that's actually huge part of the problem. And like I said, as much as it's like wrestling is its own thing, so like it doesn't resonate as well. You understand? Like wrestling, I said this before. We went to a Penn and Teller show in Vegas years ago, and Penn said something about magic that really pertained to wrestling too. He said, when people go to a movie or they go to a play or whatever, they go willing and able to check their suspension of disbelief at the door and accept whatever world, no matter how far-fetched and whatever it is, in front of them. They're willing to accept it. But when they go to a magic show and when they go to a wrestling show, they walk in there with a chip on their shoulder because they're looking for, oh, there's a mirror behind that. Oh, there's a trap door. Oh, he didn't really hit him with a clothesline. Oh, those guys are buddies. I saw them on the internet together. You see what I'm saying? Everyone's looking for the holes in our reality anyway. So that's what I'm saying. Like, don't give them any holes. Give them, like, I don't even like how nowadays it's a very common thing for us to know what wrestlers are dating who. Right? Because to me that kills everything. If one guy's a bad guy and one girl's a babyface, then it just destroys your entire dynamic, right? And then you have situations where they put him on Raw and she's on SmackDown. They must be trying to break them up. Who cares about that shit? You know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't know that. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. Like, we've got into this where it's we're athletes, but at the same time we're these actors / whatever. Like, not to spoil anybody, but on the NXT thing, the Gonzalez chick, the big 6 foot tall chick, she won. Right. She won the NXT women's title, right?
Yes.
And but then on all the social media, all the WWE social media, it's this big babyface thing. Like her family's there and they're hugging and crying. It's like, no, she's a heel. She has been a heel on your television for however many months now, and you've built her as this, and now you're giving her, the baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had her play out through everyone, including, Rhea Ripley. Pardon me if I mispronounce it. Who's involved in WrestleMania? They had her go through her as part of building her up and her credibility and making her a challenger. And I kind of want to play this. I have something fresh in my mind that may be an example of this is Bobby Lashley as the WWE champion. He's on my mind. He, was portrayed as a heel. He had a faction. He was there with MVP. Those people obviously interfered to help him win matches. He became the champion, with the aid of the Miz and very conniving and backstage kind of maneuvering to kind of get his championship. And then, after doing all this that had me view him as a negative light, when he became champion, he was celebrated. This was a man who had, waited 16 years for this opportunity, and it was a great achievement, a great accomplishment for him. And it was, but I did not expect to hear that portrayed that way on WWE television and programming. This was an individual who had got it through, unfair methods, and I wanted to see him as that, but I don't see him portrayed as that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, that's part of the problem that we were talking about is, it's almost like an Oscar to them instead of like an actual competition championship. So to them it's like an Oscar. So, it's like Cuba Gooding Jr. winning the Oscar and going up there and thanking everybody. So it's like every time someone wins, now we have to have this moment of this feel good moment of, well, they've worked so hard to get there. You know what I mean? We're gonna make you forget that they're a heel for the next however long, but this is their time to shine. They've won the Oscar. Don't play them off the stage yet. Whatever the fuck it may be. But yeah, it really bothers me to the fact of, you have to keep that kind of stuff sacred. You know what I mean? And they're not doing that. They just on the whim will do stuff like that. For instance, I believe Percy Whitmore is the greatest heel in movie history. Percy Whitmore from The Green Mile. I think he is the greatest heel in the history of cinema. You know what I mean? Because he had absolutely no redeemable qualities at all. There is nothing about that man that would make you go, I'd like to be him. You know what I mean? Or I'd like to have a beer with him. Nothing. He was just sniveling, pussy, just took advantage of people. Just every negative thing you could think about a human being, that's what he was, right? That's what heels should be, right? It shouldn't be Percy Whitmore, but he does cool moves, because then all of a sudden, then I want to do stuff like Percy Whitmore, right? See what I'm saying? Like, but we always forget that kind of stuff. Like, they think that, I'm going to go out there with a mean face, you know what I mean? I'm going to do some cool moves. I'm going to sell some T-shirts, and then, I may cheat to win at some point. Maybe, maybe not. That's kind of up in the air, too. So it's just all half-assed.
Well, when you that last little part there, when you mentioned that about how what I would refer to as going through the motions of being a heel, I suppose the credit or blame, how you want to view it, I would give to Justin Credible. He was the first one I saw do this. He had a T-shirt, I believe this was during his time with ECW. He had a T-shirt made that simply said, "I hate this town." Because it is a bit of a trope in professional wrestling that wherever you are, you hate that town if you're a heel. Yeah. And having it emblazoned on a T-shirt as he walked out just kind of screamed it to me. He said, "Oh, in case you didn't know, I'm the bad guy. I'm going to hate this town." And rather than by anything he does or, letting the audience know who he is through his actions, it's just kind of like, hey, here's the T-shirt. Now here's what you're supposed to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just incredible. I mean, I always looked at him as kind of because he was kind of clique adjacent. You know what I mean? Like he hung out with him, but like he really wasn't. He's not quoted as a member of the clique, but he hung out with those guys quite a bit. So when he went to ECW, he worked. He was the closest ECW had to a Shawn Michaels or a Triple H in that sense, or Razor, even Scott Hall at that point. So like to me, I always found that connection. But ECW was so, they had good guys and bad guys, but it was very gray area with them too,
All right. Would it be fair to say that WWE and maybe professional wrestling in general has kind of caused this problem to a degree for themselves because and I'm going to use the term kayfabe, the existence of it seems to fade in and out when it's necessary or whenever they seem to want to. For instance, I watched, I believe it was earlier today on YouTube, WWE program. Bobby Lashley was on promoting his match. And during the course of the interview, he mentioned how when he and Drew, he was already in WWE when Drew was having his tryout. And just a story about how they went out to Drew and Sheamus snuck into a bar and told them they were actually WWE talent at the time. And these kind of personal stories that indicated a relationship. And for someone like me who I wanted to see these guys kill each other later on today, I'm not interested in hearing this great, but it was on WWE. It was a YouTube show, but it was WWE programming. And so the kind of kayfabe that I miss is, even though I understand the reality of professional wrestling, I don't want to hear those things on the day of WrestleMania. This is WrestleMania Saturday as we record this, by the way. And it takes away from my anticipation for the WWE Championship match, which to me as a fan is a huge deal.
Yeah, and that's part of their problem too. Is like we say, some things translate to some things translate to wrestling, some things don't. The thing that doesn't really, in my opinion, translate to wrestling is these really intricate backstories. You understand? Like with the Marvel universe, with the MCU, you could pick any character, and I could tell you, a ton about their backstory. And they have movies and books, and there's so much. But wrestling's not that way. Wrestling is boiled down to its simplest form in most cases. Are there elements of long-term storytelling? Absolutely. Are there elements of, like situational kind of thing, like Triple H wearing the white boots? It's a big deal when he wears the white boots because he only wears them in really big matches. But what you're talking about with that's them trying to create this intricate backstory that television writers believe that they need to establish characters. But all we really want to see, that's a good guy, that's a bad guy, it's good versus evil, it's God versus the devil. Bing, bang, boom, give me the match. You know what I mean? Is the devil going to triumph this time? And then that's something, too. The movie industry, if you watch the movie, they have a code of conduct within the movie industry too, where good most of the time prevails. You understand? Like in every movie, eventually the good guy is going to win, right? Yes, there's movies where the bad guy, gets his, like the movie Seven. You know what I mean? With Kevin Spacey and
Yes.
What's in the box?
Yes.
What's in the box? But I mean, that's few and far between. But for the most part, as an industry, they decided, hey, we're going to present the good guys winning. You know what I mean? Same thing with professional wrestling. Eventually, it's got to be the good guy triumphs, because what's the story otherwise? You understand? Do we go watch Rocky to get him beat? You know what I mean? Like, even though Rocky lost the first one, he wasn't even supposed to be there, right? And the fact that he lasted with a champion was a victory enough.
Right, it gave him credibility.
Exactly. And then the second one, he ended up beating Apollo. And then the third one, we got Clubber Lang, and we thought there's no way Rocky can beat Clubber Lang. He's so, it has to be a situation where you go, oh my God, he can't do it. He can't overcome this. This guy's too strong. This guy's too big. This guy's too whatever. He can't beat him. He's got to be the underdog.
All right. I guess there's something we've alluded to, and we haven't, at least I haven't directly addressed what it is. I've mentioned my criticism toward the creative aspect of WWE, and I would include AEW among others. And it is this concept that has gained some popularity among professional wrestlers, that the concept of heel versus babyface is now passé. And I would kind of cite, let me turn to the movies. What is when movies theaters were open in 2019, we had Avengers Endgame. We've mentioned comics before. Clearly defined heels, clearly defined baby faces. The audience was behind the Avengers and trying to right the wrongs that were done by Thanos and getting to him in the end and undoing all those things. And it built to a climactic battle. Just an epic battle. We all, we waited to hear Avengers Assemble. As simple as that little phrase is, that was like a big deal when I heard that. And just a huge battle, and clearly good winning out in the end. I don't understand how you can see the all-time box office record and then say, on the other hand, that audiences now, they've moved past good guy, bad guy, heel, baby face. Clearly they've not in the case of that box office smash. So how can you say that that concept, well, that wouldn't work in professional wrestling?
Yeah, and that's kind of been my argument for this generation. They're always like, oh, professional wrestling's for everyone. You can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want. It's all entertainment. It's all show. It's all this. It's all that. And I sit there and go, okay, well, I want good versus evil in a sports-based reality. And they go, oh, no, I don't believe that anymore. Well, motherfucker, you just said anything can happen. Well, that's what I want to happen. In your way, my way doesn't hurt your way, but your way definitely hurts my way. You understand? And back to the Avengers thing. The Avengers, that moment is one of the greatest moments in movie history too, because like I was in the theater too, and I get goosebumps kind of talking about it because it was so cool to finally see that them all come together like that, right? And then when Cap got the hammer, oh my God, the roof went off. All right,
Something that was never supposed to happen.
never supposed to happen. And here's another thing about Captain America: not only is heel baby supposed to be passe, but the white meat baby face, the eternally good baby face, that's supposed to be passe too. But here we have Captain America, who's, arguably the greatest Avenger. You know what I mean? Yeah, the number one Avenger for sure. But he was arguably, obviously his trilogy did the best as far as the trilogies go, as far as critically and box office wise. So yeah, I mean, like that white meat babyface thing, all that stuff still works if you know how to do it, and that's where where the problem lies within, because a lot of people they don't understand that concept and they don't know how to bring it to life. So to them, it's they say that we're lazy because we do things a certain way, but they're the ones that are lazy because they're not learning how to actually wrestle. They're not learning how to actually work. And do these things like we've learned how to do for the past, like I've spent my entire adult life learning how to do this. It's very disrespectful to think that someone 3, 4, 5 years in the business, you know what I mean, can sit there and say, well, none of that stuff works anymore. Motherfucker, you haven't been around to know what works. You know what I mean? Like I know what worked 20 years ago and I know what works today. So who's got a better understanding of professional wrestling, you or I?
All right, I guess, yeah, and I do like the way you say learn how to wrestle, because I know, just in talking with you over time, I know that, and I want the non-wrestling members of the audience to understand that when he uses terms like learn how to wrestle, he's not talking about learning how to properly apply a top wrist lock. Like you use the term work. Yeah. I like that when you say learn how to work. I think it's one of those wrestling shorthand terms that a non-wrestler audience may miss, that I've come to appreciate a great deal more. When I used to hear people say learn how to wrestle, and I used to think, well, he knows how to execute a body slam or whatever you want to talk about, but there's so much more to it. And I guess one of the things, I'm going to quickly get in a little opinion here. When I hear this heel and baby face, and it can be anything and you can do anything, what I'm wondering is, well, why do I want to buy a ticket to watch you do just anything? And I want to try to create an analogy. MMA became popular over the recent years, and for some reason there was some kind of criticism. MMA fans would criticize wrestling fans. They're like, you can't be an MMA fan. And I think it mostly sprung up around Brock Lesnar's involvement with the UFC. And I heard a lot of those things, and I have never been a fan of MMA. And there's a very simple reason I've thought about it, why I don't really care for it, and why I'm a fan of professional wrestling, is because I have no particular interest in the outcome of any of their fights. It's one guy says, I'm going to kick your ass. And then another guy who looks, just as mean, looks back at him, no, I'm going to kick your ass. That's pretty much it. And I have no particular interest outside of Brock Lesnar's involvement. I will admit, I did kind of sneak a peek at some of his things. And I will mention, he cut one of my favorite promos he ever cut was actually after a match and an MMA.
The Budweiser thing.
Yeah, the Budweiser thing. It was I thought it was the best promo of his career.
That's quite possibly.
I'm going to let you speak on that, as why, as I'm looking at it as always, from the fan perspective. If the heel versus babyface doesn't matter, why do I care who wins? Why do I care about watching this match?
Yeah, and that's what. And like you said before, like nowadays in professional wrestling, they're trying to create each wrestler as its own brand. Like each wrestler is the New York Knicks, or each wrestler is, the Green Bay Packers. And like they're thinking, well, there's people that love the Packers and there's people that hate the Packers. Well, that kind of depends on where you are, doesn't it? You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, if you're in Green Bay, majority wise, they're going to be the baby faces. And that's what I think they don't understand. You have to go with the broad term of, this is a baby face, this is a heel, this guy needs to be loved, this guy needs to be hated, and everything we do on our program in our matches on our television needs to be heading in those directions. We don't need to have these wishy-washy, lukewarm, situations like we had with, like you said, with Bobby Lashley. Using everything he could to get the title match and gets the title match, then all of a sudden is 16 years he's been working for this. No, recently he just,
Right. He cut a deal with the Miz. He was underhanded. He had MVP conniving and doing things backstage, very almost like a video game segment where MVP's talking to
Right.
the Miz, etc., and so forth. And then you just did away with all that, because I view Bobby Lashley as a very credible heel. They portrayed him up to that point. He's a juggernaut. And I like watching him in that role, and I believe he's done a good job in it.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me as a member of the audience when I hear them just quickly, well, yeah, forget all that now. Now it's a great achievement.
Right.
16 years, what a great achievement for his career. He's patiently, diligently worked to achieve this. And let's go into something else. One of the aspects of kind of the passé references to wrestling, one of those things is that in some instances we've talked about match structure. And I've seen instances where I've seen that go away, so to speak.
Completely.
When I look at the movies, movies generally, most popular movies have a 3-act structure.
Yeah.
And there are people who can very easily tell you during the movie, here's where we move from Act 1 to Act 2 because when this event happens, the protagonist does this, then we move from Act 1 to Act 2.
Yeah.
And those sorts of things. And much the same way, wrestling matches and the cards and everything has a structure, but I hear people, well, that kind of stuff, that's kind of passé. That's old hat. Do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, storytelling doesn't change. You understand? Like you said, a movie has 3 acts for a reason. You know what I mean? Because that's what we've, determined that's the best way to tell a story within the confines. Same thing with wrestling. In wrestling, we basically have 3 acts too. It's called a shine, a heat, and a comeback and finish. Same thing with the movies. The first act is, you're establishing your baby faces and your heels and what's going on, blah, blah, and then eventually the heel takes an advantage and the baby face is left with an insurmountable, task or challenge. I recently just watched the Hobbit trilogy, right? And like Smaug the dragon,
Yes.
right? He looked unbeatable. Like how are they going to get over on this? But eventually they did, right? So that's the beauty of storytelling. How can they? You know what I mean? Same thing with a wrestling match. It needs to look like that baby face is in such jeopardy he's going to lose this match. Then all of a sudden here comes that comeback. You know what I mean? And that's where your finish is. Same thing with a movie finish. It all has to move towards a crescendo, and a lot of people don't even understand that concept. So, like you said, they just throw structure out the window, and they basically just go out there and just take turns doing moves to each other. I just watched Johnny Gargano and Bronson Reed. I like Bronson Reed a lot, but Jesus Christ. They literally everything was a reversal and everything was big move kick out. You understand? Like there's no if this is the first time I've ever touched you, this is the first time I've ever wrestled you, and I can reverse everything you did, that makes absolutely no sense. The whole point of reversals was towards if me and you had a wrestling program for 8 weeks and we wrestled all the time in those 8 weeks, and we get to that last match and I go for my finish and you reverse and you go for your finish and I reverse you. And you see what I'm saying? We've established that because we've been beaten with those moves before, so we know what they look like and feel like. So we don't. You see what I'm saying? There's a reasoning behind. There's supposed to be a reasoning behind everything we do, and now they don't even have a reason to wrestle.
All right, I guess, and I try to remind myself to speak for those who aren't inside pro wrestling, so to speak, because I'm a member of the audience, and I guess a way to demonstrate this is the criticism I often heard. Let me just deal with John Cena. That's what I'm trying to get to. John Cena, we talked about one of the things was the babyface making a comeback. Well, I think no babyface has ever had a more often criticized comeback than John Cena, the often mentioned 5 moves of doom. And everyone says that. But for all the criticisms that I heard leveled at him, I constantly saw him as much as people criticize him, I saw the reaction from the audience. Whatever you want to say about it, they were into what he was doing.
I was just talking about this last night at the show because I was at WrestleMania 31 in California, right?
Yes.
I think it's 31.
San Francisco.
San Francisco.
Well, Santa Clara, but yes.
Yeah. That stadium, my
Yes.
beloved
the 49ers.
the
home.
49ers stadium that I love so much. Anyway, so I was there, and like I said, when John Cena came out against Rusev, that entire place booed John Cena out of the building. 75,000 people booing the hell out of John Cena, right? But when that 3 count happened and he won, they lost their shit. You know what I mean? It was one of the biggest pops of the night because, and that's what I say. Okay, yeah, they boo him on the entrance, but listen to him on the finish. He always gets him on the finish. You know what I mean? They're not upset that he fucking won. You know what I mean? They may boo. But
Yeah, if Cena wins, we riot.
yeah, stuff like that.
That
But
never happened.
Never happened. But it probably would have happened with the RVD
Well,
one.
that
was the only one.
I wouldn't have tested that one on that.
I wouldn't have tested that one either. But yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like he, and he's another one of those. He's a white meat babyface. Like more Make-A-Wishes than anybody in history, and all that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing he talks about. Like, why would I turn heel? When you already boo me, so you can cheer me? That doesn't make any sense. Boo me if you want to boo me. I don't care. I'm going to be the same person. And that's a beautiful. That's one of the most unique things about him is because they took that route with him. Said no, he's going to be this, and we're going to see what happens. So I was perfectly fine with him never ever turning heel.
All right. Well, my point I want to try to make to kind of finish up on this aspect is, we're talking about movies. We're talking about involving the audience. And we've talked about Cena and the whole "Let's go Cena, Cena sucks" and all that made about it. And when his music would hit, people, invented lyrics to his song, "John Cena sucks," and all that stuff. And all that's great. But like you, I attended a WrestleMania or two, and for all the criticism I heard leveled, when he would come out, there were a couple. I've been to 3, and on those 2 occasions, I sat down in my seat and I just wanted to watch everyone else. And because he has the placement of John Cena and his reaction from the audience has always fascinated me, and I just sat and looked around and watched. And regardless of whether they were booing or cheering or doing something, everyone reacted. That's and let me be honest, there are very few performers who can say that. John Cena connected with people positively or negatively. You cared. When he came out, you cared. Every time he cut a promo, people cared. If he did the same moves in the same order too many times, people cared. And when he won or lost, people cared.
Yep. And that's a beautiful point to the fact of so John Cena, like you said, it's not love and hate are not opposites. Hate is not the opposite of love, and love not the opposite of hate in professional wrestling. Indifference.
Right. Silence is the enemy.
Silence is the enemy. Love and hate are almost the same. Yes, they may be on ends of the spectrum, but they're still the same emotional reaction, right? So being indifferent to somebody, that is the ultimate slap in the face, right? Just because you physically hate somebody. Like when people talk about X-Pac heat, you know what I mean? Because like when he come out, people go, oh, and groan, you know what I mean? But like at the same time, I don't think the ratings dipped when he came out, you know what I mean? I think that, I think he had heat. Well, I mean, he's a heel. What do you want him to do? Of course he's going to have you. You're not supposed to like him. You're supposed to be, you want to see him get his face punched in, a little weasel. That kind of.
Right. Someone who compels you to watch as opposed to just as someone who may have been guilty of this from time to time. There may or may not be professional wrestlers who, when I'm watching back a recording of a show, say I've got my DVR and I'm watching a recording, there are certain individuals who I've learned over time that they are fast forward. When I see them come out, my hand reaches for the fast forward button to move to something else. And that's exactly what you don't want. You want to involve the audience in the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, even if you love them or you hate them, you want to see where that story goes. Pretty much. So here we are. We're way over time, but that's okay because we're not dead set. We're never going to be exactly 30 minutes. We're going to be a little over most of the time. So thank you for the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and my co-host, the Marvel,
Yes.
Mark Tipton. Thank you and goodbye.